because the families are so dysfunctional now. Again, predominantly single mothers, although there's obviously, let me just put in the disclaimer, there are heroic single mothers out there who are doing the right thing by their children, but I'm sorry, on average, I'm not talking about you individual, I'm talking on average, it's the worst thing you could do for your kid not to have the father at the home. But yes, this is the last chance these kids have to get socialized. And the tragedy, again, to bring back to the disparate impact idea, something that we've just been going through with Trump's education secretary, the Obama administration had this idea that was already bubbling on the progressive left in education schools, that if black kids are disciplined more than white kids, that must be because of teacher racism. Again, you are not allowed to look at behavior. This is the key. The left will never look at behavior. And so the fact that black kids commit homicide at 10 times the rate, black teenagers between the ages of 14 and 17 commit homicide at 10 times the rate of white and Hispanic male teens combined, according to federal data on homicide, which is the gold standard. I mean, there's nothing, you know, at all a wiggle room in this data. That type of disparity in socialization that leads to those types of homicide disparities shows up in the classroom as well, as any inner city kid can tell you. The Obama rule said you may not discipline black kids more. And as a result, kids are running amok in schools. They're attacking their teachers.
So basically you just put these arbitrary rules in that clearly don't fit what is actually happening, but it makes you feel good.
It makes you blame whites. Everything, it's all the product of white racism. So yes, I'm all for informal structure. If a family cannot do it, I mean, Aristotle, again, this gets back to the secular right thing. I hear that people say, well, how do you raise a moral kid without religion? Aristotle said virtue is habit. And I don't know, I was not raised in a religious family, but is it really the case that a parent says to his 5-year-old son, don't hit your 3-year-old brother because Jesus said not to? Or is it just, do not hit your 3-year-old brother? You know, I think the authority from parental authority is sufficient. And you acclimate children to a set of behaviors that are self-controlling, deferring gratification by just teaching this is how we behave and through the inculcation of habit. I don't think in raising children, I just can't imagine at what point you need to invoke the 10 Commandments. I think that a lot of these behaviors, the Golden Rule is something that Kant talked about as something that is pretty innate to a understanding that humans develop of what is needed to function in a relatively civil society.
Yeah, I have to tell you, this is such an example of why I love doing this show, because just an hour before sitting down with you, I don't know if you know him, but I had Dr. Everett Piper on, who's the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. And you guys probably agree on politics at like 99%. And yet he's religious, and a lot of what we talked about was from a religious perspective. But that to me is, that's the beauty of what America is all about. It's like actually on the things that matter outside of what your personal beliefs are, you're agreeing on all this stuff, and then you have some differences on existential questions, and so be it.
Well, and it's also something that we're now playing with fire of being able to disagree amicably. I mean, I don't know if we should all be like screaming, you know, send in the fire alarm or the fire trucks, but this growing civil violence that is predominantly on the left. Obviously, Charlottesville was an abomination, but I would say in terms of sheer numbers of incidents, obviously the right, the alt-right, the crazies took a life, which is a game changer. I mean, that's qualitatively different than anything than, you know, following around Tucker Carlson or screaming at Trump officials. Nevertheless, the Antifa violence is playing with tribal hatreds in a way that I think is extremely naive if we think that America is permanently immune from the type of violence that still characterizes other societies.
Yeah, and nobody on the left seems to...
No.
Well, first off, CNN ignores it, basically, and then the politicians don't say anything about it. Okay, so let's link this to one of the other things that you talk about a lot, which is sort of what's happening right now, very very intensely, which seems like this new war on men or war on boys. So how is this related to it's related sort of in a racial context, especially if you're talking about young black men, but we can separate those two things a little bit if you want.
Well, females are determined to think of themselves as victims too, which is preposterous. There is not a single mainstream institution in this society, whether it's a university, a bank, a law firm, a government agency, a foundation, K through 12, that is not, well, K through 12 probably not, because there you've got a superabundance of females, but every mainstream institution is trying to hire and promote as many females as possible. I know for sure, it is just inevitable that I have been the so-called beneficiary of gender preferences continuously. You know, there's now...
Feels good to admit it, doesn't it? You know.
No, it disgusts me, frankly. You know, there's now this whole meme about manels. Thou shalt not put together a scientific panel of the top cancer researchers if it happens to be all males. You must put females on that panel. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Who cares? I really do not care who solves Alzheimer's. If it's all females because they're the best, so be it. But if it's all males, I don't give a damn.
Are you telling me that if you had heart surgery, you would want
I got to check out.
You would want the best surgeon regardless of their sexuality or gender or skin color? What kind of bigot are you?
I don't know. I guess I'm just blind to the travails of females, you know? And look at, again, females now are at least at parity. It's very curious. All the institutions that have a superabundance of females, nobody ever thinks to say, well, there must be anti-male bias, you know, but
well, that's
anything
payback or something.
I see. I see. And it's also the case, you know, in academia, if anybody says, well, there's these vast disparities of liberals to conservatives in academia, which I frankly think is kind of a side issue. David Horowitz,
really?
Yes. David Horowitz tells a story about going to Columbia in the 1950s and being taught by Marxists. But it didn't matter because mostly politics stayed out of the classroom, but they were open-minded. And my ideal of education is frankly a pure ivory tower. I think everybody should just be reading Edmund Spencer's The Faerie Queene and Milton and Trollope and wallowing in pastoral poetry. I think I shouldn't be even I don't think I should be invited to a college campus because me talking about policing is of the wisps of transitory reality that they'll get to. There's time enough after you graduate. These are 4 precious years to take a deep dive into beauty, into grandeur, into sublimity, into wit, into irony, into the greatest expressions of mankind, not into contemporary politics or homeless politics or whatnot. But that's obviously highly unlikely to happen.
That's fascinating to me because I guess I agree with the premise that I wish college could be that thing.
Right.
And then on the other hand, when I go to these schools and I see so many kids engaged in the things that we're talking about, I always leave incredibly inspired because I'm like, oh, you guys are at least awake to these issues. But I see your point. It's like if they could be, in a weird way, if they could be insulated from them a little bit to get to deeper learning of the foundational things, maybe that would be better. But
yes, Aristotle and Kant and Shakespeare and Milton's Comus. I mean, language that is so sensual, that is just of almost terrifying eroticism, they're not going to come across this later. And so I'm grateful to the fact that when I was in college, I was an acolyte of deconstruction, alas. I spent way too much time trying to plow my way through La Mythologie Blanche by Jacques Derrida and, you know, reading Lacan and Paul de Man, which was a grotesque waste of time. But multiculturalism hadn't hit yet. So I was in college in the 70s. So we read the canon without anybody thinking to complain about gonads and melanin.
Right.
So I could read the best literature. Right. Who cares? It didn't come up. It's amazing. Now you'd think that, oh, this is the first thing you ask about a book, you know, well, do I see myself reflected there? No. Okay, therefore I'm not going to read it. You know, please do not expose me to a writer that is going to take me out of myself, which is something the Renaissance humanists craved and yearned for. So anyway, the whole gender thing, the manels, there's the past president of the American Physics Society put out a call to members to nominate for physics prizes and to put on panels females. just the most egregious, blatant discarding of a meritocratic principle, something that is irrelevant to physics. So this is everywhere. And I just reject it completely. And the campus idea that females are at risk of rape culture on campus is equally